Welcome to the I Made a podcast where we hear from podcasters about the wisdom that they learned since starting their own podcast so you can do the same. And now here's your host, Chris Curry.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of I Made a Podcast. I hope that you're having a good day, and I'm grateful that you are here again today to check out this episode of I Made a Podcast. Now, today I spoke with Amy Flanagan, and she has a podcast called the Savvy Communicator. This was an amazing conversation that I had with her, and to hear about what she does as a communication specialist and also how she worked that into her podcast. So this was a great discussion. Her podcast is so awesome. I would encourage you to go subscribe and listen to it as well. We went over a lot of stuff here, so there's a lot that you're going to learn in this episode of I Made a Podcast. And remember, I have a cheat sheet that I created just for you. So the cheat sheet has resources, both software and hardware, that you can get in order to start your podcast. Or if you have a podcast already, this cheat sheet will help you to get better sound and audio. And that's what we all want as podcasters. We want that amazing sound and audio that it just makes your ears smile when you listen to it. So you can get my cheat sheet. It's in the description, and you can download it and see all the resources and use whichever ones that you need to help get your podcast better sound and audio. And the good thing about some of the resources on this list is that some of them are free. So you can try them out, see how they work, and actually get some results in your podcast before you have to start paying some money for some of these resources. But a lot of them are free. So I put a list there. That's why it's a cheat sheet. It's keeping these things for free. So you can get that resource and you can start having better sound and audio. But let's get into this episode with Amy Flanagan. Again, her podcast is called The Savvy Communicator. We're going to jump into it now. I'll be back at the end of this episode to close things off. Hello, everyone. Welcome to I Made a Podcast. Today, I'm talking with Amy Flanagan.
I am great. Thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. Now, your podcast is called The Savvy Communicator. So
Yes.
for all those who are hearing from you for the first time, can you introduce yourself and let us know what your podcast is about?
Thank you. So I'm Amy Flanagan. I'm a new podcaster. I've been podcasting for less than a year. And the Savvy Communicator, where our tagline is really how to talk when you're not sure what to say. And so my episodes kind of focus on different areas where people might want some advice on how to communicate. For example, how do you communicate if you want a promotion? How do you communicate, with your spouse if things are going, rough? How to communicate if you've got a group of people. One of my best episodes is a woman who was a tour guide for many years, and we talked about how she communicated with people when they weren't really in a good mood, and so on. So that's what I've really been focusing on with the Savvy Communicator. So it's a place where if you want advice on how to handle something, whether it's for yourself or whether it's for other people, this is a good place for you.
Wonderful. And so how long have you been podcasting for?
A little less than a year. I published my first episodes in May of last year.
Oh, wonderful. So it hasn't been a year yet, but
No.
by the looks of it, it looks like you are enjoying this journey of podcasting. So I'm glad that you're here. Thank you for introducing your podcast and letting everybody know about it. So can you talk to us about the frequency of your episodes? Do you release it, every month or weekly? Or how does that work?
My goal initially was one episode a week,
Mhm.
and I held to that goal for about 3 weeks.
Oh,
And
wow.
then with editing and, interviewing and things like that, it's now more like once every 2 weeks.
Mm,
So, I just found that was a more comfortable schedule for me so that I didn't feel like, okay, I've got to edit right away and I've got to get it out right away and I've got to do the next thing right away. So it's a
right,
little more relaxed schedule for me. So every 2 weeks.
right. And how long are your episodes like? The
They
duration?
generally, they're about 45 minutes in when I record, and then I edit down to about 35 minutes.
Wow. Okay. So you're doing all of the editing yourself as
I
well?
am.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's
Yeah.
good. I mean, I think when a lot of podcasters start out, they put on all of the podcasting hats and they do everything themselves, at least at the
Mhm.
beginning part. So it's good that that you have, a regular rhythm, I guess you can say. So your podcast is pretty much interview based, would you
Yes,
say?
it
Yeah.
is. Yeah, it's
Okay.
all interview based.
So you're looking for guests and booking them, scheduling them, and then doing the podcast and then the editing afterwards. Wow, you got your hands full
Yeah.
then, right? How do
It
you how do you feel about that process, the entire process from like start reaching out to the guests to when the podcast is published? How do you feel about the work that you have to do in each step?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really is more than I expected,
Hmm.
but I have found that I have learned so much by doing it that I've just like felt my brain grow in, putting this podcast together and, getting the Savvy Communicator out there. So, I had to learn to edit. I had to learn to do, sound balancing and all of that stuff. I had to figure out how I wanted to get guests and, how to entice them to be on this show that they may never have heard of before. And so, as far as it goes for the podcast itself, it's a lot. And I have to be really careful to schedule to say, okay, the day after the interview, that's when I edit. And the day after that is when I start promoting. And then I, fix my little, pictures and put them out on social media. And the day after that is when, the episode goes up and then you start the cycle over again. But for me personally, I've just learned so much that it's totally worth it.
Right. Yeah. I think that's the story for a lot of podcasters when they get in there. If they can manage everything, they realize that they realize that they have grown so much through this method, this method of creating content called podcasting, which is what we're going to talk about today. So what was the driving force or the main reason for you picking this topic for your podcast? So it's called the Savvy Communicator.
Hmm.
And you said that it's how to speak when you don't know what to say. That's the
Yes.
tagline. So
Hmm.
why did you choose to go into this route for your podcast?
Well, it's really interesting. So I've worked in communication for about 22 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And most of the time that I was working in communication, I was working at a place called Uniform Services University. Probably never heard of it. It's the medical school for the US military.
Okay.
They have their own medical school. And what I did was in the communications department where we would teach everybody from first year medical students how to take a history all the way up to high level doctors on how to communicate things about specific illnesses, how to have difficult conversations, things like that. And I just got very enamored of teaching communication that way because the thing is communication is trial and error, and we try and sometimes we fail, and that's very scary, and then
Hmm.
we don't want to do it again.
Hmm.
And it's the same for it's the same for students coming in, and it's the same for doctors. I'm sure you've been to a couple of doctors that maybe weren't so great with communication.
Yeah.
And that's something that we're trying to, cut off at the source.
Right.
And so I just loved it. And then I had a foot surgery and I was laid up for 2 months.
Mm.
And I started reading books about podcasting. And when they explained I have some really great books that they explained really well on why it was important to get your voice out there. And I thought, well, if I get my voice out there with my particular experience, it's like that could help. It doesn't have to be one on one with a student. It could be, out there again, showing through experience how you might try to do something. Because a lot of times when we're not sure what to say, we feel lost.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then a lot of times we avoid what the conversation is about, whether it's something at work, whether we want to be, treated differently or be considered for a promotion, or, you've got somebody that's, toxic and not treating you well,
Hmm.
to whether it's at home and you love your spouse a lot, but you're just not sure what's going on right now and you want it to be better, whether it's between friends, all kinds of things. And I wanted to do that. And that's how I got started with the
Wow.
Savvy Communicator. It took a long time to think of the name of the podcast,
Yeah.
but I like it now.
Yeah. I love the name. It's like when I think about the name right now, like, well, I know it may have taken you some time to come up with the name, but when I think about the name of this podcast, I'm just like, yeah, I totally get what this podcast is about through that name
Oh,
of your
great.
title. And you mentioned a few things there. So In the episode, I listened to a few episodes, like I tried to do with all the people that I interview. And you did an episode with Mike Goodwin, just
Yes.
recently released. And you did mention one of the takeaways that I actually wrote down from that episode, where communication is a trial and error process.
Yes.
And I think that was a huge one for me, because I feel like when you are, especially if you're talking with someone new for the first time, or if you're approaching a really contentious situation, you want to
Yes.
always tread lightly and
Mm-hmm.
understand who you're talking to,
Yes.
understand your audience, and make sure you tread lightly and learn. And then as you learn, you'll be able to approach that situation a little bit better next
Mm-hmm.
time. But in that episode with Mike Goodwin, he said something that I was, so he's a comedian and he's
Mm-hmm.
a leader in his industry, or in,
Yes.
I can't remember exactly where he is, but anyways, I would encourage everyone to go listen to your podcast and your interview with him. So I'll
Mm-hmm.
put links down in the description for your podcast so that everyone could go listen to that. But in
Thank
that
you.
episode, he said that he was a comedian, but his comedy was frowned upon when he was a kid. But
Yeah.
when he became an adult, it's like he felt like it was appreciated, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
maybe you can just take me through. This was like an aha moment for me, because like I have a 6-year old and I'm
Mm-hmm.
telling him, son, put those Legos away. It's time to go to bed.
Yeah.
Time to do this, time to do that. And at the same time, I'm seeing him play with these Legos, but he's being extremely creative,
Yes.
right? And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, you want to, when people are kids, when kids are kids, you want them to follow the rules, but then when they grow up, all of these things that they have done when they were kids actually become assets to them, right?
Yes.
So that's something that was a huge takeaway for me from that episode with Mike Goodwin, and that was a great episode. I learned a lot from the episode, and I hope to connect with
Oh, I'm
Mike.
glad.
What do you do in terms of preparing for your interviews? What kind of preparation do you do before you meet with someone on your podcast?
Mhm. What I like to do is have a short, online chat so we can see each other. And I liked the first question I ask is, what would you like to talk about? Because I think it's really important. And if you can tune in to what, somebody is really passionate about, then the interview itself is going to flow. And it's
Mm-hmm.
less that I have to ask question after question after question. I can say, tell me a story, just like you do. You said, tell me the story of how, you got to the Savvy Communicator. And I think when you do that and just let people talk, then you get so many interesting little insights or tidbits that you wouldn't get otherwise if you just said, okay, and my next question is.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing that I do. And then the second thing I do is some research. If they have like a website or other things, I go and look at that, because a lot of times in people's bios, they let you know things that they may have forgotten to tell you. And, some people aren't, they don't want to put themselves forward too much or make it sound like they're, arrogant or anything. So they won't tell you a lot of great things about
Right.
themselves. You have to go and find it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the second thing that I do. And then the third thing, I found a podcast organizational sheet
Okay.
online that I fill out that has things like, you can space where you can write your introduction. And then it says, topic one, topic two, topic three. And I start that with, kind of a general idea of what I want to give them to work with. And so I fill that out, and then we're ready to go.
Wow. I had never heard about that before. So a podcast organization sheet, and it's almost, so it works like an outline, I guess, for your
Hmm.
interview.
Yeah, I can
Oh,
send it to you.
that'd be interesting. That'd be
Hmm.
wonderful. Yeah, please do. So what I usually do is, when I talk to podcasters on this podcast, if I find new things, I've created like a cheat sheet for all, like for anyone, and it has a list of all the resources that any podcaster, whether you're new or you've been in it for a while, it has a list of all these resources. So I would love for you to share that with me, and I could put it on the cheat sheet. So if anyone else wants
Absolutely.
it, they can go there and then get it and use it for their podcast, because it looks really
Hmm.
helpful. Because I think especially when you're interviewing people, it's good to be very like organized, at least, so
Yes.
that you can, so that when you're talking with someone, you're not like, all over the place with your thoughts. You're
Oh,
kind of
absolutely.
focused in on the topic that the person is an expert in talking about, right? So
Hmm.
like you talked about, your first thing that you mentioned was you asked them if there's anything that they want to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to ask you now, is there, relating to your podcast, is there anything like what was your most memorable episode or about your podcast or your favorite episode that you've done so far?
Oh gosh. One of my favorite episodes was with a woman called Jo Zuleika.
Okay.
And she was a tour guide for many years, decades. And these were, big tours that went to very remote locations and were with, let's say, people that expected to be taken care of very well. And so we talked about her type of leadership and how you have to work with a whole group of people and keep them happy even when they might not be happy at all, and keep them moving in one location. And the best story that she told me is that one day they were going on an elephant ride and they had miscounted the number of elephants that they needed for the guests, so she had to hike behind 20
Oh,
elephants
wow.
in order to get to the next location. And you can just think of all the things the elephants left behind, she would have to be hiking around. And that's just stayed with me, as far as, things we do for our jobs. But also, she just talked about how leadership is something that oftentimes we think, well, that's not for me. I don't really want to lead. But leadership is something that we all have to cultivate because we all want to put ourselves first.
Mm.
We all want to lead ourselves sort of forward. And that really stayed with me. I thought that
Mm.
that was excellent advice.
Okay, wonderful. Like I said before, I'm gonna put that sounds like such an interesting story. Now I want to go back and I didn't listen to that episode, but I want to go back and listen to it now. So I'm gonna put the links for your podcast down below in the description for this episode. So if anyone wants to go listen to that episode in its completion and hear the rest of that story and what you can learn,
Thank
they can
you.
go and listen to that one. Now, what was
Okay.
so you've been podcasting almost a year now.
Mhm.
So if I said, "Hey, Amy, I'm gonna cause one thing about podcasting that you hate to disappear with my magic wand,"
Ooh.
what will that one thing be that you wish would not exist anymore, or one challenge, or one thing that you just wish would disappear when it comes to podcasting that just grind your gears or make you
Mhm.
want to leave completely? What's the one
Oh
thing that you hate
gosh.
about podcasting?
Editing.
Editing, really?
Editing, yes. It's it's hard it's worth it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard to kind of, go through line by line and be like, okay, should I leave this word? It flows better if I leave this in, or does it flow better if I take it out?
Mm-hmm.
And and it's much more precise than I thought it would be. And I'm not always a precise person. I'm kind of a yeah, just throw it
Right.
out there. And you realize that in order to make your show something that is clear, some to communicate it well, that's
Right.
kind of that's sort of what I'm putting out there, so I better do it well. And that you really need to edit very precisely. So if I could have a beautifully precise podcast just by waving the magic wand, that's what I would go for.
Oh, wow. Wonderful. That's good to know. So I don't know if I told you before, but I'm a podcast producer. So I produce
Oh,
podcasts for other people as well. So this is
yeah.
something that I do. So maybe if I could help you later, I'll definitely will connect and we
Okay.
could work out something. It's totally up to you. but
Okay.
but yeah, this is because so when I tell people this all the time, they look at me like if I'm crazy. But the part
Really?
of podcast that I love the most is editing.
Really?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's crazy that everybody that I've spoken to so far, this is like the number one thing that they hate doing. And I'm just like,
Mhm.
why? I love editing. I would wake up
Yeah.
early in the morning to, edit stuff out for my podcast, which is why I do it for other people as well. So
Sure.
anyways, that's just a side
Okay.
note.
That's
So
really good to know.
right. So editing is, I think, one of the top things that people don't like about podcasting because, like you said, in order to put quality content out there, you want to make sure that you are very precise and your audio is clean and clear, so it
Yes.
doesn't have other things in it, background noises and all these other
Mm-hmm.
things and filler words and whatnot. So yeah,
Yeah.
editing your podcast is very important. Now, would you say that this is one of your biggest challenges for your podcast or for you doing your podcast?
It certainly gets easier the more you do it.
Yes.
And it's certainly, and your ear kind of changes
Mm-hmm.
so that as you're looking and, listening, you're like, okay, you know what? We don't need to know about this particular thing. It kind of gets in the way of the main idea that I want to get across. So it's okay to cut this out. At first, I didn't want to cut anything out because I'm like, well, my guest said that, therefore, it's really important. And it is important, but you want to get the big idea through.
Right.
And so it gets easier, and my, ear is better for, kind of flowing through and, picking out what's best. So I'm glad I've learned it,
Yes.
and I'm glad that I can do it.
Yes.
But I'd still wave that magic wand, I
Yeah,
think.
get it to disappear.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So I noticed, so in that episode that I listened to of your podcast, I noticed that there was like a musical interlude that you included like in your podcast. I
Yeah.
know that's the first time that I've actually, so I've heard people do stuff like that for
Mhm.
like, and then do voiceovers like for ads and, promotions and stuff. But you just
Mhm.
had this musical interlude in your episode. And I don't know if you had it before in other episodes, but can
Mhm.
you, why is that there in your episode?
Well, it's firstly there because I wanted to see if I could do it.
Okay.
And secondly, I thought, well, it would be nice to have a little transition, a little break where people would know it's okay to pause
Hmm.
and go and get a drink or whatever. And after I had it a couple of times, I got feedback from people saying, the music is nice, but I expect something different to come afterwards. I expect an ad or, promoting a different episode or
Right.
something like that. And you just go back to the same interview. And I was like, oh, that's a good point. And also, I wanted to have it because I just wanted that pause for
Hmm.
a little bit, but it turned out I don't have it anymore. I took it out
Okay.
because of the feedback I got, or people saying it's nice music. Like, that's great, but it's a
Hmm.
little strange
Yeah.
because nothing changes there.
Yeah.
And my hope is as I go along, maybe, I will do exactly that. I'll have the interlude and promote a different episode or things like that.
Hmm.
But right now, not ready to do it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I listened to it and I had to ask the question because I've never heard it before in anyone else's podcast. So it
Oh,
was good explanation of why it's there, and if you can use it to do something else in the future, why not?
yeah.
People notice it because they reached out to
Yeah.
you, right? So that could
That is true.
could be an indication that maybe you can maybe do something with that 15 seconds, promote one of your other episodes maybe. But anyways, that's totally up to you. I just wanted to understand a little bit more
Hmm.
about why it was there in your podcast. Now, as I mentioned, sometimes people put those interludes when they are going to put like sponsored post or promote something, and that leads me into like monetization. Now, I
Hmm.
know you reached out to me before when we were setting up this call and you said that you don't monetize this podcast, but and you said you would help us to understand why you decided not to. Do you want to share your explanation with why you decide not to monetize your podcast, or if you want to,
Sure.
if even if you change your mind down the line, or what are your thoughts behind that?
So my first thought was, okay, this is another complex thing and I'm scared of it.
Okay.
So I don't want to deal with it right now when I started. And I was like, okay, I'll just leave that for a while. And right now I still feel like I'm beginning. And my audience is I have, good fans that listen to every episode. I even have an international
Wow.
audience,
Really?
which is really
Wow.
cool.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
And it was funny at first. I was like, somebody in Chile is listening to my episode. But I really got excited by that. But my audience is still small. And I just don't think it's the right time yet. And I don't feel ready to take that on as another task
Hmm.
just yet.
Hmm.
That's the first reason. The second reason is that I'm also not in a position right now where I want to put ads in that I can't, control. Like I, have a podcast host and they, automate ads for you. They just automatically put them in, but you don't know what they are necessarily.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I'm not ready for that.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to know, okay, this is going to be, an ad about something that would fit in with my audience, and I think that they would appreciate hearing. And trying to think of how to say this. You know how it is. You just want your podcast to sort of, have the same feeling throughout and push the same message throughout. And you don't want to have it be like, I'll be right back. And then have somebody being like, buy my stuff. And it's much better than that. That was my very bad imitation of
Yeah, but
some
it gets the
ads.
point across though.
Yeah. So that's really why
Hmm.
I think I want to spend more time monetizing when I'm ready to do it
Right.
than I have the time right now.
Got you.
It's
Yeah.
really tempting though. You hear all of these amazing stories and they're like, you do this and you get your lines of income coming in. And so I'm starting to look at it more seriously.
Yeah, but that's good insight though. I interviewed someone else way back in January this year, I think, and he has a podcast where he interviews authors.
Oh,
But it is for him, he chose not to monetize his podcast because there could be conflicts of interest with
mm-hmm.
regards to certain authors that are allowed onto his podcast. Like, say, for example, if he has a deal with a publishing company, right?
Oh, okay.
Then that publishing company would probably say, okay, you can't interview this author because he's with one of our competitors, type of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So things like that, I think people need to consider as well when it comes to monetizing, because it's not for everybody, it's not for every podcast, but there's a lot to consider. And if you have the opportunity to get to that point where you can bring in sponsors for your podcast and there's no conflict of interest, and you don't have to sell your soul, of your podcast in order to make some money through it, then go ahead with it. But it's not the be all and end all. And also, if you have your own services that you offer through your podcasts, that you could also promote promote yourself, promote your services through your podcast. But there's a lot to consider when you are going down that avenue of how can your podcast generate revenue. I just want to transition maybe to ask about promotion. So you talked about you have listeners international in Chile. My sister-in-law is from Chile, by the way.
Really?
Yeah, she's wonderful.
Oh, it's a beautiful country.
Yeah, it was wonderful. But anyways, my question
Yeah.
about promotion. What are some of the things that you do to promote your podcast to get the word out there so that people in Chile can listen to it and people around the
Yeah.
world? What are some of the things that you do to get your podcast out there?
The first thing that I do is I have a separate Facebook group that's just for fans and people who are interested in the show. I started it before I even published an episode,
Mm-hmm.
and I called it Amy's Podcast Adventure. And I said, if you want to come along on this journey where I see, what's going to happen, please join. And I was so surprised because I got 100 people
Wow.
on that group just by asking.
Hmm.
So that was the first thing. The second thing I did was create a Facebook page that's called the Savvy Communicator, where I started to post articles about communication and things I thought people would be interested in to try and get people that I didn't know interested in the show. And I even boosted a couple of posts. I paid, you can pay $5
Right.
and get it boosted for the day. And I got a lot of reactions, through that. And I got a lot of people joining the page. And so I put every episode out there too. I
Wonderful.
have a Twitter account that's just for the Savvy Communicator, where I post where I post every episode
Mm-hmm.
after I've published it. And I follow a lot of different podcast groups like Good Pods or other ones that will promote the episode for you. I'm considering there's a group called Podcast Overlord on
Mm-hmm.
Twitter, and they have a Patreon, and it's $3 a month, and they promote your show every single day. And that sounds like a good deal to me, and I'm thinking about joining that
Mm-hmm.
as well. And then I have Instagram, and I put up mostly on Instagram because it's meant for short, bursts of information,
Yep.
pictures, short videos. I will do a picture that has myself and the guest and what the title is. And then I'll also do short reels saying, have you ever wondered about this?
Mm-hmm.
come and listen to the Savvy Communicator. And that's about all that I'm doing right now with with promotion.
With promotion. Wow, that's really, really good. So you're using a lot of the social media apps out there to get
Yes.
the word out about your podcast. That's awesome. Can
Mhm.
I can I just double down on a question there, or a comment that you mentioned in your answer there? So you talked about having a Facebook group and
Yes.
having a Facebook page.
Yes.
So what was the reasoning for having both? Why couldn't you have done just one or the other, or what was the reasoning for having both?
The reason for having both was that I wanted to communicate to the group of, like, friends, family, acquaintances, everybody that I had connected with on Facebook, because I wanted to be able to tell them, some of the inner workings of the podcast. Hey, I tried this and it didn't work. Hey, you know what? My podcast is doing this, but now I'm thinking about YouTube, about putting the show on YouTube as well and expanding it more out there. And then I chose the page for people I didn't know that might not
Okay.
be interested in as much of the personal side. They might be interested, but they're also scrolling.
Right.
And so I made it more shorter and to the point, and said, this is the episode, this is what we're talking about, please come join us. Or saying, this is a great article that talks about something close to my heart, you might be interested in this also, to try
Mhm.
to build interest that way. So one group was for people I knew that might want more of the personal side, and the other group was people I didn't know that might just want more straight to the heart of the information.
Gotcha. Okay. And it's working for you. So that's great. Yeah. Good insight. Because I was on that fence as well. Should I create a Facebook page or should I create a group? What's the
Hmm.
difference? And I just went with a Facebook page for now. And, slowly but surely, I'm starting to, I know I got to be more diligent in, posting stuff and engaging with people on that, in that page, with that page, I should say. But
Hmm.
yeah, I was on that fence determining should I go one way or the other. So thank you for sharing that insight. I think a lot of people will learn from that, because I think Facebook is a great place to connect with people. That's how I met
It
you.
really is. Yes,
Yeah, through a group, right?
that's the
So
truth.
yeah,
Yeah, that podcast group that we're a part of, and there are many out there,
yes,
I
yeah.
highly recommend to anybody that's interested to join one or more of those Facebook groups for
Hmm.
podcasting, specifically for finding podcast guests, or putting yourself forward to be a guest,
Yes, yeah,
because you meet people that are doing things that are close to your heart that you never even knew. You
absolutely.
know, I
100% agree.
yeah, like you said, I wouldn't have met you otherwise, and I'm just fascinated by everything that you do.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been a like I've learned so much from the people that I've met from some of those Facebook groups, and a lot of them have been on the podcast here. So
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, join some Facebook groups and engage and talk with people, and share your story and share your podcast, and be on their podcast, vice versa.
Mhm.
It's collaboration at its best, actually. I think those Facebook groups. So maybe let's talk about some of the technical aspects of your podcast now, right? So I usually
Okay.
ask people what's in their podcast in toolbox, right? So
Okay.
what's kind of software you're using, or and then what kind of hardware you're using. I don't know if you have any specifics with regards to like your podcast and room setup, if you have like soundproofing, if you have a booth, or whatever,
Sure.
right? Can you tell us what do you use to create your podcast?
To create my podcast, what I started with was the editing software. So I use and the recording software. So I use a software called Squadcast,
Oh,
sorry,
okay.
to do my recording. And the reason why I use that as opposed to Zoom is that Squadcast is connected with a software called Descript, which is
Yes.
what I do my editing in. So it's just easier to transition the audio and video from Squadcast to Descript.
Right.
Zoom is also great
Yes.
and free.
Right.
So I do pay a monthly fee for Squadcast and Descript together. The second thing that I got was my microphone.
Mhm.
I waited until I had some gift cards from Christmas.
Yeah, you do what you got to do, right?
You absolutely, and I have the Shure SM7B, pretty
Mhm.
sure it's the SM7B, and I love it. It is my beloved microphone, and I found that investing in the microphone has really made a difference as far as I feel, in the recording and the sound quality.
Right.
Now, something else that I've found is that Descript and another, Buzzsprout
Mm-hmm.
is another one. They offer mastering services
Mm-hmm.
that you can pay like an extra dollar a month and then hit a button that says, give me studio sound or give me magic mastering or whatever. And it smooths out the whole thing for you.
Yep.
So if I knew that when I started, maybe I wouldn't have invested in this microphone, but I'm very happy to have it.
Yeah.
And I like it a lot. So that's my microphone. And I have a Dell laptop that I've had for a while. And it has a webcam that I didn't like very much. It was very grainy. So I invested in, I have a simple Logitech $30 webcam that I use, and it works really well. And at first I thought, maybe I need to get the best webcam out there because I want the best video out there to go with awesome audio. You need the best of things.
Yep.
But most recording software, I discovered, does not do anything higher than like 720 pixels.
Really?
So even if you get, as far as what I've encountered, so even if you get the best, the clearest 4K webcam, you're still not going to get video that's higher than 720 pixels because that's what the software uses.
Hmm.
So I'm glad that I just, invested in a basic microphone that does 720 pixels. And so it agrees with the software and it works really well.
Mm-hmm. Wow,
Yeah.
wonderful. So it's good that you bring that up though, because I think in all of the tools and things that we can get for our podcast, we need to make sure that we take in the system requirements or the
Yes.
how things work together with regards to the
Hmm.
technology so that you don't get the compatibility. That's the word I'm looking for. To make sure that things are compatible with other softwares that you may be using for your podcast. So yeah, for all
Hmm.
the podcasters out there, if you're if you have to buy anything new to produce your podcast, make sure you check the compatibility. Because you mentioned a Dell laptop that you have.
Hmm.
I have an HP laptop that I had since 2008
Wow.
and
Okay.
it's still working fine. So,
Yeah.
but one of the things that if I ever have to get anything new, I always have to check that compatibility for the reason that I don't want to have to get a new laptop, right?
Hmm.
But it hasn't limited anything that I've done with my podcast since. So, compatibility with the different softwares that you might get is very
Hmm.
important. So, thank you for mentioning that. So, you talked about your microphone, your computer, some software. Like, what about hosting? Where are you using? Is Buzzsprout? I think you said you use for hosting.
Buzzsprout is my host,
Okay.
and I'll say I chose them specifically because they also have a little podcasting school that's totally
Ah.
free, and it's like 15 lessons, and they talk about, microphones and, explain which ones they use and why they recommend this for a beginner versus this for someone that's more experienced. And while I was laid up with my foot, I watched their little podcast school, and that also got me very interested in me and helped me feel like, hey, I could do this.
Mm-hmm.
So when it was time, and they never advertised, their service. They talked about it and they said this is, how it works. But at the end of it, I was like, absolutely, I will join Buzzsprout because they gave me all this free education.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, and I guess that's part of their marketing, right? We're going to give you all
Mhm.
this free education, set you up so that you can succeed in hopes
Yes.
that you will come to us and do your hosting and host your podcast with us so that we can, make some money off of you. But
Exactly.
we want you to succeed and be on our platform for a long time, right? So that,
Hmm.
I could see how that works for them. Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. So we're just about to wrap up. Is there anything that I may have forgotten to ask you or that you want to share with anyone about your podcast or about anything podcast in general?
Wow. I guess what I would like to share is that it's been so worth it for me
Mm-hmm.
as a journey. And at first I thought, well, I'm going to be doing this because I want to get my message out to other people. And that's certainly what I want to do. But the personal benefits that I've gotten from learning this, from having to, talk to people and, promote my show and get guests on and then, help to promote them and their shows, because a lot of times they have podcasts too. And it just becomes this network that is such a positive thing to be a part of. And I've learned so much and I've met so many people. And I'm so proud of myself for doing this, that I think the benefits that you get personally are worth it. Even if you have 10 listeners, you are going to enjoy what you're doing, hopefully. And you're going to feel the benefits of that. And you know what? The next day you'll have 11 listeners, and the next day you'll have 12. And that journey is interesting, because at first I thought, well, it's all about the numbers. I have to reach 1 million people or I'm not successful. And it was explained to me that they said, well, imagine if you are out on the corner of the street shouting your podcast out, and you have 10 people that stop what they're doing to come and listen to you. That's a lot.
Yep.
You get 20 people that come and listen to you. Wow. Now 30 people have come, again, stopped in the middle of the street to listen to you. That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it only goes up from there. And that was one of the best pieces of perspective that I've gotten.
Yes. I use a similar analogy, but instead of on the street corner, I use inside of my house, coming over for dinner to talk about my podcast.
Yeah.
So can you imagine like 50 people downloaded your podcast? You might be kicking yourself, be like, oh, I only got 50 people to listen this week. But can you imagine those 50 people coming over for dinner in your house?
Yeah.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Perspective is absolutely important. So yeah, that's a great insight for any podcaster who is just getting started, or who may be discouraged by the number of downloads. And I heard someone say this before: comparison is the thief of joy, right? So if you compare yourself to, the big podcasters out there, and they may be getting 1 million downloads every single episode, but you're just starting out. You're 10, 20, 30 people who listen to every episode. If those people are benefiting through what you are doing through your podcast, it is absolutely worth it. And if you are enjoying it, and if you are connecting with good people when you are interviewing them and talking to them on your podcast, and if you have peace in your heart when you're doing it, it's absolutely worth it. And that's what I like about this podcast as well. I get to meet, people, podcasters all over the world, and talk about podcasting, which is what I love. So Amy, thank you so much for coming on the podcast with us. So again, everybody, the podcast is called The Savvy Communicator, and there's links in the description of this episode so that you can go and listen to her podcast. And Amy, it was a pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much.
Chris, I had a wonderful time. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, that's it for another great interview today. I hope that you learned something great about podcasting from my guest. And remember, I have links for all of their podcasts, all of their resources, all of their socials and everything. It's in the description if you want to follow them and get more of their content. If you learned something new from today's guest, and if you want more of I Made a Podcast, you can subscribe on all of the major podcasting apps, on Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Squadcast, Overcast, iHeartRadio. Just search I Made a Podcast and you'll be able to find this podcast and subscribe, and you'll get every future episode that I release on a Wednesday. And don't forget to sign up for my podcasting cheat sheet. The link is in the description. Or if you're a podcaster and if you want to work with me to produce your podcast, I have a link in the description for you to contact me as well. So remember, the best time to start a podcast was 10 years ago. The second best time is right now. So go ahead and make it happen. And I'll see you next week on I Made a Podcast. Peace.